in the midnight sun. When he staggered up and smashed it on the stones, it rang as clearly as the convict's chains that haunted him. All through the months to come, it rang on like the burden of his freedom to try for the right tone, not tract, not thesis, and walk away from floggings. He who thought to squeeze his slave's blood out and waken the free man shadowed a convict guide through Sakhalin. Sandstone Keepsake. It is a kind of chalky, russet, solidified gourd, sedimentary and so reliably dense and bricky I often clasp it and throw it from hand to hand. It was ruddier, with an underwater hint of contusion when I lifted it, wading a shingle beach on Inishowen. Across the estuary, light after light came on silently round the perimeter of the camp. A stone from Phlegethon, bloodied on the bed of hell's hot river. Evening frost and the salt water made my hands smoke, as if I'd plucked the heart that damned Guy de Montfort to the boiling flood. But not really, though I remembered his victim's heart in its casket, long venerated. Anyhow, there I was with the wet red stone in my hand, staring across at the watchtowers from my free state of image and illusion, swooped on, then dropped by trained binoculars. A silhouette not worth bothering about, out for the evening in scarf and waders, and not about to set times wrong or right, stooping along, one of the venerators. Shelf life. Granite chip. Houndstooth stone, Aberdeen of the mind. Saying, "An union in the cup I'll throw, I have hurt my hand, pressing it hard around this bit hammered off Joyce's Martello tar, this flecked, insoluble brilliant I keep but feel little in common with, a kind of Stone Age circumcising knife, a Calvin edge in my complacent pith. Granite is jaggy, salty, punitive and exacting. Come to me, it says, all you who labour and are burdened, I will not refresh you. And it adds, seize the day, and you can take me or leave me. Old smoothing iron. Often I watched her lifted from where its compact wedge rode the back of the stove like a tug at anchor. To test its heat by ear, she spat in its iron face, or held it up next her cheek to divine the stored danger. Soft thumps on the ironing board, her dimpled, angled elbow and intent stoop as she aimed the smoothing iron like a plane into linen, like the resentment of women. To work, her dumb lunge says, is to move a certain mass through a certain distance, is to pull your weight and feel exact and equal to it, feel dragged upon and buoyant. Stone from Delphi. To be carried back to the shrine some dawn, when the sea spreads its far sun crops to the south, and I make a morning offering again, that I may escape the miasma of spilled blood, govern the tongue, fear hubris, fear the God, until he speaks in my untrammelled mouth. Making strange. I stood between them, the one with his travelled intelligence and tawny containment, his speech like the twang of a bowstring, and another, unshorn and bewildered in the tubs of his Wellingtons, smiling at me for help, faced with this stranger I'd brought him. Then a cunning middle voice came out of the field across the road, saying, "Be adept and be dialect. Tell of this wind coming past the zinc hut. Call me sweetbriar after the rain, or snowberries cooled in the fog. But love the cut of this travelled one, and call me also the cornfield of Boaz. Go beyond what's reliable in all that keeps pleading and pleading, these eyes and puddles and stones. And recollect how bold you were when I visited you first with departures you cannot go back on." A chaffinch flicked from an ash, and next thing I found myself driving the stranger through my own country, adept at dialect, reciting my pride in all that I knew, that began to make strange at that same recitation. The Birthplace. The deal table where he wrote, so small and plain. The single bed, a dream of discipline. And a flagged kitchen downstairs, its moat slants of thick light. The unperturbed, reliable ghost life he carried, with no need to invent. And high trees round the house, breathed upon day and night by winds as slow as a cart coming late from market, or the stir a fiddle could make in his reluctant heart. That day, we were like one of his troubled pairs, speechless until he spoke for them, haunters of silence at noon, in a deep lane that was sexual with ferns and butterflies, scared at our hurt, throat-sick, heat-struck, driven into the damp-floored wood, where we made an episode of ourselves, unforgettable, unmentionable, and broke out again like cattle through bushes, wet and raised, only yards from the house. Everywhere being nowhere, who can prove one place more than another? We come back emptied, to nourish and resist the words of coming to rest. Birthplace, roof beam, whitewash, flagstone, hearth, like unstacked iron weights afloat among galaxies. Still, was it 30 years ago I read until first light for the first time to finish The Return of the Native? The corncrake in the aftergrass verified himself, and I heard roosters and dogs, the very same as if he had written them. Changes. As you came with me in silence to the pump in the long grass, I heard much that you could not hear. The bite of the spade that sank it, the slithering and grumble as the mason mixed his mortar, and women coming with white buckets like flashes on their ruffled wings. The cast-iron rims of the lid clinked as I uncovered it. Something stirred in its mouth. I had a bird's-eye view of a bird, finch green, speckly white, nesting on dry leaves, flattened, still, suffering the light. So I roofed the citadel as gently as I could and told you, and you gently unroofed it. But where was the bird now? There was a single egg, pebbly white, and in the rusted bend of the spout, tail feathers splayed and sat tight. So tender, I said, remember this. It will be good for you to retrace this path when you have grown away and stand at last at the very centre of the empty city. A bat on the road. A bat-like soul waking to consciousness of itself in darkness and secrecy and loneliness. You would hoist an old hat on the tines of a fork and trawl the mouth of the bridge for the slight bat thump and flutter. Skinny, downy webs, baby nails clawing the sweatband. But don't bring it down. Don't break its flight again. Don't deny it. This time, let it go free. Follow its bat flap under the stone bridge, under the Midland and Scottish Railway, and lose it there in the dark. Next thing, it shadows moon-slick laurels, or skims the lap net on a tennis court. Next thing, it's ahead of you in the road. What are you after? You keep swerving off, flying blind over ash pits and netting wire, invited by the brush of a word like peignoir, rustles and glimpses, shot silk, the stealth of floods. So close to me I could hear her breathing. And there, by the lighted window, behind trees, it hangs in creepers matting the brickwork. And now it's a wet leaf blowing in the drive. Now soft-deckled shadow convolvulus by the white gates. Who would have thought it? At the white gates, she'd let them do whatever they liked. Cling there as long as you want. There's nothing to hide. A hazel stick for Catherine Ann. The living mother of pearl of a salmon just out of the water is gone just like that. But your stick is kept salmon silver. Seasoned and bendy, it convinces the hand that what you have you hold to play with and pose with and lay about with. But then, too, it points back to cattle and spatter and beating the bars of a gate. The very stick we might cut from your family tree. The living cobalt of an afternoon dragonfly drew my eye to it first, and the evening I trimmed it for you, you saw your first glowworm. All of us stood round in silence, even you, gigantic enough to darken the sky for a glowworm. And when I poked open the grass, a tiny, brightening den lit the eye in the blunt cut end of your stick. A kite for Michael and Christopher. All through that Sunday afternoon, a kite flew above Sunday. A tightened drumhead, an armful of blown chaff. I'd seen it grey and slippy in the making. I'd tapped it when it dried out white and stiff. I'd tied the bows of newspaper along its 6-foot tail. But now it was far up, like a small black lark. And now it dragged, as if the bellied string were a wet rope hauled upon to lift a shoal. My friend says that the human soul is about the weight of a snipe. Yet the soul at anchor there, the string that sags and ascends, weigh like a furrow assumed into the heavens. Before the kite plunges down into the wood, and this line goes useless, take it in your 2 hands, boys, and feel the strumming, rooted, long-tailed pool of grief. You were born fit for it. Stand in here in front of me and take the strain. The Railway Children. When we climbed the slopes of the cutting, we were eye level with the white cups of the telegraph poles and the sizzling wires. Like lovely freehand, they curved for miles east and miles west beyond us, sagging under their burden of swallows. We were small and thought we knew nothing worth knowing. We thought words travelled the wires in the shiny pouches of raindrops, each one seeded full with the light of the sky, the gleam of the lines, and ourselves, so infinitesimally scaled, we could stream through the eye of a needle. Sweetpea. What did thought do? Stuck a feather in the ground and thought it would grow a hen. Rod by rod we pegged the drill for Sweetpea, with light brittle sticks, twiggy and unlikely in fresh mould. And stalk by stalk we snipped the coming blooms. And so, when pain had hair-cracked her old constant vestal stare, I reached for straws and thought, seeing the sky through a mat of creepers, like water in the webs of a green net, opened a clearing where her heart sang without caution or embarrassment, once or twice. Widgeon. It had been badly shot. While he was plucking it, he found, he says, the voice box, like a flute stop in the broken windpipe, and blew upon it, unexpectedly, his own small widgeon cries. The King of the Ditchbacks. As if a trespasser unbolted a forgotten gate and ripped the growth tangling its lower bars, just beyond the hedge he has opened a dark morse along the bank, a crooked wounding of the silent cobwebbed grass. If I stop, he stops, like the moon. He lives in his feet and ears, weather-eyed, all pad and listening, a denless mover. Under the bridge, his reflection shifts sideways to the current, mothy, alluring. I am haunted by his stealthy rustling, the unexpected spoor, the pollen settling. I was sure I knew him. The time I'd spent obsessively in that upstairs room bringing myself close to him. Each entranced hiatus, as I chain-smoked and stared out the dormer into the grassy hillside, I was laying myself open. He was depending on me as I hung out on the limb of a translated phrase, like a youngster dared out onto an alder branch over the whirlpool. Small dream self in the branches, dream fears I inclined towards, interrogating. Are you the one I ran upstairs to find drowned under running water in the bath? The one the mowing machine severed like a hair in the stiff freeze of harvest, whose little bloody clothes we buried in the garden? The one who lay awake in darkness, a wall's breadth from the troubled hoofs? After I had dared these invocations, I went back towards the gate to follow him, and my stealth was second nature to me, as if I were coming into my own. I remembered I had been vested for this calling. When I was taken aside that day, I had the sense of election. They dressed my head in a fishnet and plaited leafy twigs through meshes, so my vision was a bird's at the heart of a thicket, and I spoke as I moved like a voice from a shaking bush. King of the Ditchbacks, I went with them obediently to the edge of a pigeonwood, deciduous canopy, screened wane of evening we lay beneath in silence. No birds came, but I waited among briars and stones, or whispered, or broke the watery gossamers if I moved a muscle. "Come back to us," they said, "in harvest, when we hide in the stooked corn, when the gun dogs can hardly retrieve what's brought down." And I saw myself rising to move in that dissimulation, top-knotted, masked in sheaves, noting the fall of birds. A rich young man, leaving everything he had for a migrant solitude. Station Island. A hurry of bell notes flew over morning hush and water-blistered cornfields. An escaped ringing that stopped as quickly as it started. Sunday, the silence breathed, and could not settle back, for a man had appeared at the side of the field with a bow saw held stiffly up like a lyre. He moved and stopped to gaze up into hazel bushes, angled his saw in, pulled back to gaze again and move on to the next. "I know you, Simon Sweeney, for an old Sabbath breaker who has been dead for years." "Damn all you know," he said, his eye still on the hedge and not turning his head. "I was your mystery man, and am again this morning. Through gaps in the bushes, your first communion face would watch me cutting timber. When cut or broken limbs of trees went yellow, when wood smoke sharpened air or ditches rustled, you sensed my trail there as if it had been sprayed. It left you half afraid. When they bade you listen in the bedroom dark to wind and rain in the trees, and think of tinkers camped under a heeled-up cart, you shut your eyes and saw a wet axle and spokes in moonlight, and me streaming from the shower, headed for your door. Sunlight broke in the hazels. The quick bell notes began a second time. I turned at another sound. A crowd of shawled women were wading the young corn, their skirts brushing softly. Their motion saddened morning. It whispered to the silence, "Pray for us, pray for us." It conjured through the air until the field was full of half-remembered faces, a loosed congregation that straggled past and on. As I drew behind them, I was a fasted pilgrim, light-headed, leaving home to face into my station. "Stay clear of all processions," Sweeney shouted at me, but the murmur of the crowd and their feet slushing through the tender, bladed growth opened a drugged path I was set upon. I trailed those early risers who had fallen into step before the smokes were up. The quick bell rang again. I was parked on a high road, listening to peewits and wind blowing round the car, when something came to life in the driving mirror. Someone walking fast in an overcoat and boots, bareheaded, big, determined in his sure haste along the crown of the road, so that I felt myself the challenged one. The car door slammed. I was suddenly out, face to face with an aggravated man, raving on about nights spent listening for gun butts to come cracking on the door, yeomen on the rampage, and his neighbour among them, hammering home the shape of things. "Round about here, you overtook the women," I said, as the thing came clear. "Your Lough Derg pilgrim haunts me every time I cross this mountain, as if I am being followed or following. I'm on my road there now to do the station." "Oh, holy Jesus Christ, does nothing change?" His head jerked sharply, side to side and up, like a diver surfacing. Then, with a look that said, "Who is this cub, anyhow?" he took cognizance again of where he was. The road, the mountain top, and the air, softened by a shower of rain, worked on his anger visibly until it is a road you travel on your own. I who learned to read in the reek of flax, and smelled hanged bodies rotting on their gibbets, and saw their looped slime gleaming from the sacks. Hard-mouthed ribbon men and orange bigots made me into the old fork-tongued turncoat who mocked the buyer of their politics. If times were hard, I could be hard too. I made the traitor in me sink the knife. And maybe there's a lesson there for you, whoever you are, wherever you come out of. For though there's something natural in your smile, there's something in it strikes me as defensive. I have no mettle for the angry role, I said. I come from County Derry, born in earshot of an Hibernian hall where a band of ribbon men played hymns to Mary. By then the Brotherhood was a frail procession, staggering home drunk on Patrick's Day in collarettes and sashes fringed with green. Obedient strains like theirs tuned me first. Had not that harp of unforgiving iron the Fenian strung? A lot of what you wrote I heard and did. This Lough Derg station, flax pullings, dances, summer crossroads chat, and the shaky local voice of education. All that. And always orange drums, and neighbours on the roads at night with guns. I know, he said. But you have to try to make sense of what comes. Remember everything, and keep your head. The alders in the hedge, I said. Mushrooms. Dark clumped grass where cows or horses dunged. The cluck when pith-lined chestnut shells split open in your hand. The melt of shells corrupting. Old jam pots in it rain clogged up with mud. But now Carlton was interrupting. All this is like a trout kept in a spring, or maggots sown in wounds. Another life that cleans our element. We are earthworms of the earth, and all that has gone through us is what will be our trace. He turned on his heel when he was saying this, and headed up the road at the same hard pace. I knelt. Hiatus. Habit's afterlife. I was back among bead clicks and the murmurs from inside confessionals, side altars where candles died, insinuating slight, intimate smells of wax at body heat. There was an active, wind-stilled hush, as if in a shell the listened-for ocean stopped, and a tide rested and sustained the roof. A seaside trinket floated then and idled in vision, like phosphorescent weed. A toy grotto with seedling mussel shells and cockles glued in patterns over it. Pearls condensed from a child invalid's breath into a shimmering ark, my house of gold, that housed the snowdrop weather of her death long ago. I would stow away in the hold of our big oak sideboard and forage for it, laid past in its tissue paper for good. It was like touching birds' eggs, robbing the nest of the word wreath, as kept and dry and secret as her name, which they hardly ever spoke, but was a white bird trapped inside me, beating scared wings when health of the sick fluttered its pray for us in the litany. A cool draught blew under the kneeling boards. I thought of walking round and round a space utterly empty, utterly a source, like the idea of sound, like an absence stationed in the swamp-fed air, above a ring of walk-down grass and rushes, where we once found the bad carcass and scrags of hair of our dog that had disappeared weeks before. blurred swimmings as I faced the sun, my back to the stone pillar and the iron cross, ready to say the dream words, I renounce. Blurred oval prints of newly ordained faces, Father, pronounced with a fawning relish, the sunlit tears of parents being blessed. I met a young priest, glossy as a blackbird, as if he had stepped from his anointing a moment ago. His purple stole and cord or cincture tied loosely, his polished shoes unexpectedly secular beneath a pleated, lace-hemmed alb of linen cloth. His name had lain undisturbed for years, like an old bicycle wheel in a ditch, ripped at last from under jungling briars, wet and perished. My arms were open wide, but I couldn't say the words. A rainforest, he said. You've never seen the like of it. I lasted only a couple of years. Bare-breasted women and rat-ribbed men. Everything wasted. I rotted like a pear. I sweated masses. His breath came short and shorter. In long houses, I raised the chalice above headdresses. In hoc signo. On that abandoned mission compound, my vocation is a steam off drenched creepers. I had broken off from the renunciation while he was speaking to clear the way for other pilgrims queuing to get started. I'm older now than you when you went away, I ventured, feeling a strange reversal. I never could see you on the foreign missions. I could only see you on a bicycle, a clerical student home for the summer, doomed to the decent thing, visiting neighbours, drinking tea and praising homemade bread. Something in them would be ratified when they saw you at the door in your black suit, arriving like some sort of holy mascot. You gave too much relief. You raised a siege the world had laid against their kitchen grottos, hung with holy pictures and crucifixes. And you, he faltered, what are you doing here but the same thing? What possessed you? I at least was young and unaware that what I thought was chosen was convention. But all this you were clear of, you walked into over again. And the god has, as they say, withdrawn. What are you doing, going through these motions? Unless... Again he was short of breath, and his whole fevered body yellowed and shook. Unless you are here taking the last look. Suddenly, where he stood was bare as the roads we both had grown up beside, where a sick man had taken his last look one drizzly evening, when steam rose like the first breath of spring. A knee-deep mist I waded silently behind him on his circuits, visiting. An old man's hands, like soft paws rowing forward, groped for and warded off the air ahead. Barney Murphy shuffled on the concrete. Master Murphy. I heard the weakened voice bulling in sudden rage all over again, and fell in behind, my eyes fixed on his heels like a man lifting swathes at a mower's heels. His sockless feet were like the dried broad bean that split its stitches in the display jar high on a window in the old classroom, white as shy faces in the classroom door. Master, those elders whispered. I wonder, Master, rustling envelopes, proffering them, withdrawing, and, Master, I repeated to myself, so that he stopped, but did not turn or move, his shoulders gone quiet and small, his head vigilant in the cold gusts off the lough. I moved ahead and faced him. shook his hand. Above the winged collar, his mottled face went distant in a smile as the voice readied itself and husked and scraped. Good man yourself, before it lapsed again in the limbo and dry urn of the larynx. The Adam's apple in its weathered sack worked like the plunger of a pump in drought, but yielded nothing to help the helpless smile. Morning field smells came past on the wind, the sex cut of sweetbriar after rain, new-mown meadow hay, birds' nests filled with leaves. You'd have thought that Anahori School was purgatory enough for any man, I said. You've done your station. Then a little trembling happened, and his breath rushed the air softly as scythes in his lost meadows. Birch trees have overgrown Leitrim moss. Dairy herds are grazing where the school was, and the school garden's loose black mould is grass. He was gone with that, and I was faced wrong way into more pilgrims absorbed in this exercise. As I stood among their whispers and bare feet, the mists of all the mornings I set out for Latin classes with him, face to face, refreshed me. Mensa, mensa, mensam, sang in the air like a busy whetstone. We'll go some day to my uncle's farm at Toom, another master spoke. For what is the great moving power and spring of verse? Feeling, and in particular love. When I went last year, I drank 3 cups of water from the well. It was very cold. It stung me in the ears. You should have met him. Coming in as usual with the rubbed quotation and his cocked bird's eye dabbing for detail. When you're on the road, give lifts to people. You'll always learn something. There he went, in his belted gabardine. And after him, a third fosterer, slack-shouldered and clear-eyed. Sure, I might have known, once I made the pad, you'd be after me sooner or later. 42 years on, and you've got no farther. But after that again, where else would you go? Iceland, maybe. Maybe the Dordogne. And then the parting shot. In my own day, the odd one came here on the hunt for women. End of side 1.